Brusilov Offensive, June-September 1916, Russia's most successful offensive. Austria Hungary nearly collapses. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving deep into one of the most staggering, yet often overlooked, military operations of the First World War. The Brusilov Offensive. In the summer of 1916, while the world's eyes were fixed on the brutal slugfests at Verdun and the Somme, the Russian Imperial Army unleashed a storm on the Eastern Front that almost knocked Austria Hungary out of the war entirely. This wasn't just another costly battle. It was a masterclass in tactical innovation that changed the very nature of offensive warfare. So, let's set the stage. By early 1916, the war on the Eastern Front had become a grinding stalemate. Much like in the West, Russia had suffered some humiliating defeats in 1915, being pushed back hundreds of kilometers in what was known as the Great Retreat. Morale was low, supplies were scarce, and the Tsar's leadership was being seriously questioned. Meanwhile, Russia's allies, France and Britain, were getting hammered. The French were locked in a desperate, existential struggle at Verdun, and they were begging the Russians to launch an attack to draw German forces away. An Allied conference was held at Chantilly, France, to coordinate their efforts for 1916. The plan was for a simultaneous summer offensive by the British, French, and Russians to squeeze the Central Powers from both sides. The Russian High Command, or Stavka, initially planned a major offensive near Vilna, in modern-day Lithuania, using a massive concentration of troops and artillery, the classic steamroller approach they had favored before. This is where General Aleksei Brusilov enters the story. He was the commander of the Southwestern Front, facing the Austro Hungarian forces in Galicia, a region covering parts of modern-day Poland and Ukraine. Brusilov was a different kind of general. He was an old-school cavalryman, but he had a sharp, modern mind. He believed the traditional Russian tactic of concentrating overwhelming force on a single, narrow front was outdated and predictable. The enemy could see it coming, rush in reserves, and grind the attack to a halt. He had a radical new idea. Brusilov proposed that instead of one massive punch, his southwestern front would launch a series of simultaneous surprise attacks along its entire 300-mile length. The idea was to hit the Austro-Hungarians everywhere at once, sowing chaos and confusion. By attacking on such a broad front, he would prevent the enemy from knowing where the main effort was, making it impossible for them to shift their reserves effectively. It was a higher-risk, higher-reward strategy. His superiors at Stavka were skeptical. They thought he was spreading his forces too thin, and denied him the extra reserves and heavy artillery he requested. They told him his offensive would be purely a diversion for the main northern attack. Essentially, they said, "Go ahead, but you're on your own." Undeterred, Brusilov went to work. For months, his men prepared with meticulous secrecy. He understood that surprise was his greatest weapon. Russian soldiers dug extensive networks of trenches, called saps, that zigzagged toward the enemy lines, sometimes getting as close as 75 yards. This would allow his infantry to cross no man's land in seconds, minimizing casualties from machine gun fire. To maintain secrecy, most of this digging was done at night. Aerial reconnaissance was used extensively to map every detail of the Austro-Hungarian defenses, every trench, every machine gun nest, every artillery battery. He issued detailed maps to even his junior officers, something that was almost unheard of at the time. He believed in empowering his commanders on the ground to make their own decisions. His philosophy was clear: attack everywhere, find the weak spots, and exploit them. Ruthlessly, on June 4, 1916, the storm broke. The offensive began, not with a days-long bombardment like on the Somme, but with a short, terrifyingly accurate, and intense artillery barrage. For about 5 hours, Russian guns methodically destroyed the Austro-Hungarian front lines. The accuracy was key. Thanks to the excellent reconnaissance, the gunners knew exactly what they were targeting, They shredded barbed wire entanglements and systematically silenced enemy artillery batteries. The Austro Hungarian defenders, who believed their positions were impregnable, were caught completely by surprise. Then the Russian infantry went over the top. Pouring out of their advanced trenches, they overwhelmed the shocked and demoralized Austro Hungarian troops. The breakthrough was immediate and spectacular. In the north of Brusilov's sector, the 8th Army under General Kaledin shattered the Austro Hungarian 4th Army, capturing the city of Lutsk within just 3 days. This was an advance of over 50 miles, an incredible speed by World War I standards. The Austro-Hungarian soldiers, a mix of different ethnicities with shaky loyalty to the Habsburg Empire, surrendered in droves. Entire regiments simply laid down their arms. In the first few days alone, the Russians took over 200,000 prisoners. The success was intoxicating, but it created its own problems. Brusilov's armies were advancing so fast, they were outrunning their supply lines. The Russian railway network was notoriously inefficient, and getting food, ammunition, and reinforcements to the front was a logistical nightmare. Brusilov desperately pleaded with Stavka for more troops to exploit the massive breach he had created. But the High Command, still fixated on their own planned offensive in the north, hesitated. The commander of the neighboring front, General Evert, was notoriously cautious and repeatedly postponed his supporting attacks. This delay gave the Germans, Austria Hungary's senior partner, a crucial window of opportunity. The German Chief of Staff, Erich von Falkenhayn, realized the gravity of the situation. He knew that if Austria-Hungary collapsed, Germany would be left to fight a two-front war alone. He had no choice but to pull divisions from Verdun, exactly what the French had hoped for, and rush them to the Eastern Front to prop up their failing ally. German reinforcements began to arrive, and they were of much higher quality than the Austro-Hungarian troops. They organized a series of counterattacks, and the fighting became much tougher. Despite this, Brusilov's offensive continued to grind forward throughout July and August. His armies pushed into the Carpathian Mountains, threatening the heart of Hungary. The sheer scale of the Austro-Hungarian losses was mind-boggling. By the end of the offensive, they had suffered around 1.5 million casualties, including nearly 400,000 taken prisoner. The Austro-Hungarian army was effectively broken as an independent fighting force and would rely on German command and support for the rest of the war. The Brusilov Offensive had a massive impact on the entire war. First, it saved the French at Verdun by forcing Germany to divert precious troops eastward. Second, it forced the Central Powers to halt their own offensive against Italy. Third, it convinced Romania, who had been sitting on the fence, to finally join the war on the Allied side, hoping to grab some territory from Austria-Hungary. Unfortunately for Romania, this turned out to be a disaster, as German and Austro-Hungarian forces quickly overran the country, but the decision was a direct result of Brusilov's success. So why did the offensive ultimately stop? By late September, after nearly 4 months of fighting, the Russian army was exhausted. They had suffered over 1 million casualties themselves, staggering number that Russia as already strained society could not easily absorb. Ammunition was critically low, and the men were worn out. The arrival of tough German reinforcements had stiffened the opposition, and the advance slowed to a crawl. With the onset of autumn rains turning the ground to mud, Brusilov had no choice but to call a halt. In the end, the Brusilov offensive was both a stunning tactical victory and a tragic strategic failure. Tactically, Brusilov's method surprise, broad front attacks, short and accurate bombardments, and empowering local commanders were revolutionary. They were the blueprint for the stormtrooper infiltration tactics the Germans would later use to great effect in 1918. He proved that the stalemate of trench warfare could be broken. However, the cost was immense. The loss of over 1 million of Russia's best remaining soldiers hollowed out the imperial army. These were experienced, motivated troops that the country could not replace. The massive losses fueled war weariness and anger back home, contributing directly to the social unrest that would explode into the Russian Revolution just a few months later. In a bitter irony, the army's greatest victory of the war helped pave the way for the collapse of the very monarchy it was fighting for. The Brusilov Offensive stands as a testament to military genius and a tragic symbol of Russia's immense sacrifice in the First World War. It was a brief, brilliant flash of success in a conflict defined by failure and stalemate, a victory so costly it ultimately helped destroy the victor. Thanks for watching. If you found this deep dive interesting, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more history content, and let me know in the comments what other battles you'd like to see covered. See you next time.